if I knew what I was going to do and why I was doing it, I wouldn't do it.
Sometimes we're living on different planets because there is no fucking way of communicating with you all. Who the fuck are you people anyway? Hey? Who the fuck are ya?
Welcome in the Balie. My name is Merlijn Geurts. I'm program editor here in the Balie. And I've also been involved in the organization of the Tony Coates exhibition, and that we organized together with the support and the cooperation with the Hartwig Art Foundation. We have the central artist of the exhibition with us. So give a very warm welcome to Tony Coates. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure.
So, to start a bit with the beginning, we just watched the recent work that you made. It's Evil 80 Empathy. Since the 80s, you make videos that look a bit like this. So you have a combination of music and sounds, bright colors. You have animated text from all kinds of sources. And I was interested that if you look at your art development, you studied photography and creative writing. And in your current work, you don't use any images. And you also don't use any written text by yourself. I thought, could you share a bit how you developed?
I found myself wanting to incorporate writing with photography, which kind of put me in a strange position with some of my teachers. And
they didn't like it?
At the time, I believe they were very concerned with establishing themselves as a fine art medium as opposed to the myriad cultural uses to which photography avails itself. And also, in combination with text, it became maybe more problematic. Like people would say things like, if you're going to use text in a work, you will be responsible for the entire history of literature. And I'm like, people use images and words together all the time.
Yeah.
I'm just interested in maybe doing so in a differential way.
And if you think about, like, you started with photography, with visuals, and after a while, you dropped these images. Is there a particular moment, or has there been an incentive that led you away from this image?
Language had been, in my video work, a kind of component. But at a certain point, and I think it was actually in the late 1990s, a collaborative that I had been involved in for several years kind of went into a kind of musical direction. And I, instead of resisting it so much, I kind of embraced it. And I wanted to do kind of a series of essays that were kind of about that project and about the things that I was thinking about in relationship to it. And I thought, oh, it would be great to do this as almost like liner notes for the music project.
Yeah.
And so I came up with this idea of a series of videos that would be about popular music and relations to it, ways of maybe thinking about it and reconstructing it. And so I decided, oh yeah, that'd be great to just do them with text and not with images. I'll tell the truth, I did a sketch for one of these works that incorporated both kind of very simple loops manipulated with digital filters. And it was like, it wasn't anything wrong with it. It was just that I felt that it would be more direct to actually do it with language and not, even loop a kind of quotidian, music video clip. I saw it, in some ways as being kind of a hybrid, related to maybe conceptual art practices, but having a different subject matter. And So that was kind of the beginning of it. Later, I think it had a particular charge with regard to certain classes of imagery, like in the post 9/11 world. I knew that there were certain violent images that would be provocative, but I was kind of cautious about being in the business of recirculating these images and maybe taking a page from, somebody like Douglas Hubler, who would say, the world is full of images, more or less. Do we need to add more to them? I thought it might be more straightforward to actually comment on those images in their absence, rather than, simply...
then reproduce it. Okay, so you have this music, you have this text, and I was just interested in how do you relate to these kind of texts? Do you quote them? Do you edit them? How would you describe that relationship with the sources that you use? Because you don't want to reproduce images, but you reproduce, in a way, certain texts, certain music?
From project to project, I think that varies a little bit. I have done some projects that were literal restating of, every word like a transcript. But I've also done things that interrupt the text in different ways, word by word breakdowns of a text, for instance, in some cases. But most of the time, there are sort of identifiable and legible, phrases and parts of things. Like, for instance, in Evil 16 torture music, I found this, text, and I had done a fair amount of research, both in the journalistic field and in the academic field, on the subject of music in relation to so-called enhanced interrogation or torture. I, found this text that actually, I didn't use the entire text, but I used a pretty large chunk of it. And one of the things that attracted me to that particular text was that it kind of went through a number of different filters and categories, so that it was not univocal, but it was interesting that, some of it was, academic, theoretical, some of it was like a reading of ways in which audiences and journalists had responded to the use of music in torture.
A lot of people use the word DJ if they think about the artistic practice that you have. Do you actually think yourself that's a good word?
In some ways, probably, yes. I mean, usually the first thing that I actually commit to is the sound. And often I choose the sound not strictly speaking because it's the most appropriate, quote unquote, music that one could choose, but rather because I believe that the musical sensorium is a way of actually adding material and making maybe the text more complex in certain ways.
You're looking for this relationship between the music and the text.
Yeah, it's almost like a construction. I prefer that there be maybe certain distances between the music and the text than have them be, coded either in terms of genre or in terms of, social context being similar. And I violate my own rules all the time. I tend to like to have a certain distance. So, the vernacular way of expressing it would be, it gives a viewer something to do other than, match, the music to the text.
Yeah.
Like you kind of have to maybe think, a little bit expansively or think in layers about those relationships and what might be possible. Because on a certain level, I feel almost as though, I tell people I don't do period soundtracks. If I'm going to do a piece about the 1980s, you can rest assured it's either something from the 60s that I'm listening to or something that I'm listening to contemporaneously. In a certain way, I think it's maybe also part of an ongoing complication that I want to make. That I
if
want
it matches too well, you don't like it.
I don't like it. It kind of irritates me, I'll be honest.
You're also a professor. You're teaching. How are those two practices, your artistic practice and your teaching practice, related? Because I was thinking you're also educating your students. Do you feel like with your artistic work there's also part of education in it?
I don't know. I found teaching to be productive in many ways. But also, I think, I guess early on I, came to a belief that you could argue that all culture teaches something, or inculcates or reproduces certain values. And, I've tried to, not in a kind of literal way, but to make that information, if you will, or knowledges or complexities available. And whether, people necessarily would match what I, thought about it in kind of intentionalist terms, I don't know whether that's, in itself useful. But yeah, I like the idea that, work can speak back to particular histories, modes of representation. Why shouldn't it?
Yeah.
And maybe be somewhat explicit in its methodology that it wants to produce differential meanings or contest, again, so-called, obvious conclusions. Or if I knew what I was going to do and why I was doing it, I wouldn't do it. It's sort of like, it would be less interesting. I couldn't concentrate on it. I couldn't engage with it. So that's a part of it, I think.
Give a very warm applause again for Tony.